Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about the court case Plessy versus Ferguson. This is an old case that really created the precedent of segregation in America. In both schools and daily lives, this means that the white people and black people of this time had to be in separate locations for these things to occur. This case originally happened in April and May of 1896 between Homer Plessy and John Ferguson. Something to take note of is that Homer Plessy was a mixed-race man with both white and black descent, but under the laws of the time he was considered a black man. John Ferguson was the judge that presided over these cases at the state level. It happened in the Supreme Court of the United States in Washington, D.C. The main thing to think about here is that this was all based on Louisiana's Separate Car Act of 1890. This act stated that there must be an equal but separate train car accommodation for both white and non-white passengers. Homer Plessy was part of a group called the Committee of Citizens, and they were a group of Creole descendants of a variety of races, and they wanted to conduct an experiment to see what would happen if one of them would sit in a whites-only train car. Plessy volunteered to sit in this train car, and he ended up being arrested and then taken to court. In court, Plessy's lawyers argued that these laws were unconstitutional, but he ended up losing, so he appealed to the Louisiana Supreme Court and ended up losing there. In these cases, this is where Ferguson was the judge, and because Plessy appealed, that's why his name is on the court case. At the Supreme Court level, this is where the court must decide whether or not these laws of segregation were constitutional or not. In the end, there was a 7-1 majority decision against Plessy, which upheld the constitutionality of these segregation laws. The court also held that these segregation laws were within the state's policing power. This meant that the states were allowed to enforce and react to these laws if they wanted to. This also held that the laws did not violate the 13th or 14th Amendments of the Constitution that were created after the Civil War, abolishing slavery and promising equality to all citizens. This also came up with the idea of separate but equal, which was also loosely based on the Roberts versus Boston case, where a black family tried to enroll their child into an all-white school, but the city rejected. They called for the continuance of schools of both white and black children to be separate, as long as these institutions were equal, meaning that they were still separate and equal. So the reasoning behind this upholding of the law is that it did not violate the 13th Amendment according to the court, as this amendment only struck down slavery. According to the majority, it also did not violate the 14th Amendment, as this amendment only gave legal equality, not social or discriminatory equality. This means that these people only get the same legal rights, such as the right to vote or the right to freedom, not the social rights to say that they should be exempt to the same things that have been happening to them. The court also reasoned that these laws were within the state policing power, as long as these laws were not designed to oppress against a particular class. So if they felt that these different institutions were equal, if they were separate, they would think it would be okay. The court also rejected the notion that the law marked Americans who were black with a badge of inferiority. As in a court that was quoted in this case said of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said, following the order of divine providence, human authority ought not to compel these widely separated races to intermix. So the reaction of this case really laid in place the groundwork for segregation of America, stating that segregation was legal to happen as long as the institution stayed separate but also equal. The lone person who dissented for this decision criticized the majority of his peers' argument. He stated that he believed that the law implied that blacks were inferior. He also stated that the majority was being willfully ignorant on the subject. He used the example of not letting black nurses on trains with their white masters, even though it might be completely necessary for this master's health for them to have their nurse with them. This also led to greater divide in all these different institutions, as they were not equal as they should be to those of the white Americans. At one point in Florida, Spending on white schools was $50 million, and while spending on black schools was $5 million. At this time, the population of Florida was over 55% black. This case ended up being later overruled by Brown versus the Board of Education, which effectively ended segregation in America, even though there were still problems of segregation for decades after this ruling. And these are the references that I used for this. Thank you.